So the truth is, I want to talk about something tonight, which in truth is a deep inyan, but we have to make it very practical. The truth is, that's the whole inyan of Sefer Parashas. The whole inyan of learning the parashas of our ancestors is all about that, taking very deep things and making them practical. Of all the Svarim and Chumash, of all the 5 books of Chumash, the most practical, the most, it's Parashas. It's all about stories, practical, physical stories. So this week's Parashas Vayeira, we know the famous incident of the Malachim, right? Avram Avinu, after the Bris Milah, 3 days after the Bris Milah, he's sitting in pain, waiting, looking for guests, right? So we know that Hashem sends him 3 angels disguised as Arabs. But, we all know the famous story that eventually he sees them, and he brings them into his house, and he gives them what to eat. Listen to what Chazal say. This is a medrash in Parashas Yisrael. Medrash says the following thing. It's talking about later on in history when Moshe Rabbeinu goes up to heaven to receive the Torah. When Moshe Rabbeinu is up in heaven to receive the Torah, Chazal say the following thing. Hador d'chsev, that if you want to understand why is it that we were able to receive the Torah, why is it that we were able to bring down the Torah from heaven, Hador d'chsev, the explanation is based on the following pasuk. Alisa lamaro, the Moshe Rabbeinu, you went up to heaven, Shavisa Shevi, you captured a treasure. Lokachta matanes ba'adam. And you were able to bring down this present of the Torah because of the merit of the person that's called Adam. What does that mean? Chazal said the following thing. At the time when Moshe Rabbeinu was up in heaven, Bikshu Malachei Asharis Levgaya b'Moshe. The Malachim were ready to attack Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu was up there trying to take the Torah away from them. And the Malachim are ready to attack Moshe Rabbeinu. Asa by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so Hashem performed the miracle. What did he do? Asa Kadosh Baruch Hu klasterin shel panav shel Moshe doimel Avram. Chazal say that Hashem performed the miracle. He changed the face of Avram to look like. He changed the face of Moshe Rabbeinu to look like Avram Avinu, to look like Avram. Amalem Kadosh Baruch Hu, and then seeing a person that looks like Avram Avinu, Hashem said to the Malachim, "Iyatem isbaishim mimenu." You're not embarrassed. You're not embarrassed to attack this person. Isn't this the same person that you went down hundreds of years ago to visit his house? And you ate from his food, from his house. So aren't you ashamed to attack this person? It's Avram Avinu. Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu l'Moshe. So Hashem said to Moshe Rabbeinu, Lo nidna lecha Torah, the only reason why I'm giving you the Torah, the only reason why you're able to survive this, and you're coming down from Har Sinai with the Torah, and you're not going to be killed by the Malachim, El b'schus Avram. It's because of the merit of Avram Avinu serving the Malachim in his house in this parasha. That's why you're receiving the Torah. Shenamar lakachta matanis ba'adam. That's the meaning of the pasuk, that you're receiving the Torah. You're able to take down the Torah because of Adam. Who is Adam? Chazal say vein Adam ha'amrakan el Avram. Adam means Avram Avinu. Shenamar. One second. Shenamar, as the pasuk says, ha'adam ha'gadol ba'anakim, the man that's great amongst giants. That's Avram Avinu. Everything will become clear. So Chazal are telling us the following thing: that the reason why Moshe Rabbeinu was able to descend from heaven and was able to take the Torah away from the angels was because Avram Avinu fed the angels when they came down to visit him. This expression. Okay, so the question is obvious. What's going on over here? What's going on over here? Why is it that Davka, through the schus of Hachnasas Archim, through the schus of feeding these angels, were we able to give them the Torah? And what exactly is going on? Number 2, what's very interesting is also these malachim that came to visit Avram Avinu. So what happened to them? I mean, they had specific missions. One malach was here to tell Avram Avinu, to heal Avram Avinu for his bris milah. The other malach was supposed to tell him that he's going to have a Yitzchak, and the other malach, was going to save Lot and so on. But after all the missions were done, you assume that they just went back up to heaven. Chazal say no. Chazal say that the truth is those 2 malachim were unable, because of their interactions in this world, because of their experiences in this world, they were unable to go back up to heaven, and it took a number of years. Only until Yaakov Avinu was older and going and traveling to find his wives Rachel and Leah, only then were the Malachim able to go up to heaven. Why? What took them so long? So listen to what it says in Likutei Halachos. He writes the following thing. It's based on Svarim. He's quoting from earlier sources as well. He says as follows. What stopped the Malachim from being able to ascend back up into heaven was because of the following thing. He says like this. The reason was because of the fact, Nasan la Malachim lechol. The reason is because they ate from physical food. That was the problem. because they came down here, the food that Avraham Avinu gave them, as kosher as I'm sure it was, you know what I mean? As you know, with all the stamps of kashrus and everything, they ate from physical food because of their involvement in the physical act of eating. Because of that, says Lakutei Halachos, they were unable to ascend back up into heaven until a period of time where they were able to sort of cleanse themselves. And he goes as follows, and that's exactly what happened. And he goes on to say, he talks about exactly why Yaakov Avinu, what happened special at that time they were able to go back up. So the question is, how do we understand all this? How do we understand all this? Why is it exactly that the Torah was given dafka because of the interaction between the Malachim and Avraham Avinu, dafka because Avraham Avinu gave them food, and why is it that their food stopped them from being able to go back up into heaven? So the truth is like this. Eating is a big deal. Eating is a big deal. It's a big deal. Eating is a big deal. The first mitzvah, the first mitzvah that Hashem ever gave, the first commandment that Hashem ever said to a human being, the first commandment that Hashem ever said to a human being was about food. It was about food, right? Hashem said to Adam Rishon, to Adam, right before the sin, he said, "Mikol eitz hagan ochel toichel." From all the fruits of all the trees you should eat. But from the eitz hadas, from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, don't eat.
The first diet ever.
The first thing was the first mitzvah to ever be said to a human being was about food. Was about food. What does that mean? And the truth is, if you think about it, go further, the great downfall of humanity, the great plunge into the depths of all humanity that we're still suffering from because of that sin was also about food. Again, Adam Rishon eating from the eitz hadas, a tree of knowledge of good and evil, it plunged humanity into the mamash, the lowest of places. And when he's punished, what is he punished with? Chazal Pasuk says, "B'zei apecha toichal lechem." It's with the sweat of your brow you're going to eat bread. That food somehow plays a major role in this. What's the inyan of food? What's the inyan of food? So this is a deep inyan. It's a very deep inyan. The Sfarim tells the following thing. The tachlis of why we're here. What are we here for? The tachlis of why we're here is one thing. It's one word. Beirurim. Beirurim. What does Beirurim mean? Beirurim means clarifications. It means as follows. The world that Hashem created and became even more so through the sin of the eitz hadas, of eating of the knowledge of the tree of good and evil. The world that we have is a world of mixture. It's a world of mixture, of mamish taroivis, of confusion between good and bad. Good and evil, light and darkness, mishtamsh and barbuvia are mamish, are included in everything. Every act that a person does, a person encounters good and evil, always. The tachlis, the purpose of creation as a Jew, is for a person to be down in this world and to be involved in physical things and to make birurim, to clarify, to somehow separate between what's good and what's bad. That's the job of a person. There is no greater aspect of life where this concept of clarifying, of separating between good and bad is more pronounced than it is when it comes to food. And of all food, the most that it's pronounced is with bread. What happens with what's bread? Bread is that you have to sweat. You mamish have to sweat. We don't experience this because we just go to the store and buy bread. But if you want to make bread, what happens? You have to plow, and you have to sow, and you have to cut the grain. And even when the grain is there, you have to crush it to get it out of its shell. And then what happens? You have to sift it. And then after the sifting, you have to crush it even further. And then you have to mix it with water and to mix it and to separate the loaves and to bake it in an oven and all that. And then finally, after all the hard work, all the sweat of the brow, then you have the piece of bread. Then what happens? Is that 100%? No. It's really when the real separation begins. When you eat it and your body digests it, now the separation between the true goodness of this bread and the true negative, the true excess, extra garbage in this bread is now separated. And that's what happens inside the Jewish person. The inyan of food in Jewish life means the following, that the tachlis of a Jew is to go down into this world, descend into all the muck, into all the garbage in this world, and to clarify, to start clarifying good and bad. It means to be involved in physical life, but at the same time realize that within the physical life that a person finds himself sometimes trapped in, there's going to be there's things to take and there are things to let go. There are things to clarify good and there's bad. That's the job of a Jew. That's what food means. Chazal say the Sfarim say the following thing. that since the entire mission of a Jew, the entire life of a Jew is nothing but birur, nothing but clarifying, nothing but being involved in separating good, and then from the good that you separate to separate that even further, to sift it further and further and further, to eventually get down to the goodness of all goodness, which is Hashem Himself. That process is something very traumatic. And the more a person goes, the more a person is involved, the harder he fights, the more effort he puts in to find Hashem in his life, the more he feels that he's farther away. Because that's what happens. When a person, let's say, has wheat and he sifts it, he feels like he made it. But then when he wants to go further, he finds even more garbage. And then when he separates the good from that bad, he thinks he made it. But you know what? There's even more garbage to separate. The more a person pushes, the more a person seeks good, the more a person separates between good and bad, the more he feels it's an unending project, and the more he feels he's far away. Listen to what Rabbi Nachman writes in Likutei Moharan. He writes the following thing. When a person begins to enter the world of serving Hashem, not when a person is born Stam a Jew and he does things out of habit. When a person begins to enter the world of serving Hashem, what it means to serve Hashem really, when a person begins the process of separation, of separating between good and bad, of living a life of where he's focused on finding Hashem, of finding the good in all the garbage of life. When a person begins this, as I had derech shemaran loy, then initially what he confronts is the following: hisrachkus. The initial reaction that he will find is a feeling of distance. That's what he's going to find. When he begins to think about becoming who he can become, about beginning the process of making bread, to begin the process of sifting between the good and bad, of finding godliness in all the muck of this world, the first reaction is a feeling of distance. And the person feels as if he's being pushed away. And he feels as if he's not even allowed to enter the place of serving Hashem. But the truth is, a person has to remember that the truth is those feelings of distance, that a person feels himself far away from Hashem when he begins to try. Those are dafka. The truth is that's the beginning of coming close, because the beginning of separating between good and bad is the revelation that there's bad. That's what it is. If a person wasn't even trying, a person grows wheat and he just takes the wheat off the stalk and starts eating it as if it's all good, that's really far away from true goodness, from a real piece of bread. How does a person begin the process of finding goodness? How does he begin the process of finding that piece of bread, of sifting and working and eventually getting to that piece of bread which gives him life? The beginning is realizing that there's muck. The beginning is realizing that there's garbage he has to sift through. That's the beginning. That's the beginning. And a person feels that in his ruchnius, a person feels that in Avodas Hashem, that he feels distant. That's the beginning of him coming close. He goes on to say, and a person has to strengthen himself very, very much, not to become depressed from this. When a person sees days and years pass by, that he's constantly trying, he's really trying to become good. He's trying to become good, and he constantly, and he's still, the more he tries, the farther he feels. So Rav Nachman says you should realize that the reason why that is not because you're actually far away. It's because you're sifting more and more and more. You're finally getting closer. You're getting closer to the goodness. And the closer you get to the goodness, the more garbage you have to go through. And you're not feeling the good, you're feeling all the garbage. But realize that the farther you feel, the more distance you feel. That's dafka a siman of you getting closer and closer to your goal. Says Rabbi Nachman the following thing. A person has to be very stubborn when it comes to serving Hashem. And he goes on to say, all these feelings of depression, the feelings of smallness, the feelings of a person falling in his Yiddishkeit, you have to pass through these things. That's part of life. Part of the process of sifting and finding the goodness in reality. Part of the process of finding Hashem within all the psilas, within all the garbage of this world, you have to pass through these things. And that's part of the process of sifting. Before you enter the end goal, which is the gates of holiness. And he goes on to say, and the truth is, whether they want to admit it or not, even great tzaddikim have to go through this. Davka great tzaddikim have to go through this. And he goes on to say, it could be that there's a person, mamish, standing by the door. He's almost there. He's about to finish, to complete that piece of bread, so to speak. He's about to completely unearth the goodness within all the garbage of his life. But what? And automatically he goes back. Why? Because he just can't take it anymore. He doesn't realize that he's almost there. Because this entire life of finding, of sifting, of getting closer and closer, all he felt was distance. All he felt was the garbage that he didn't even realize he's sifting through. So when it actually comes to the point of where he's almost there, he's about to enter, he's about to breach the wall, he's about to cross over into holiness, he turns back. Because he says to himself, I can't take a life of being far away. And Rav Nachman is screaming, idiot, you're almost there. You're about to enter the world of holiness. But what happened? He didn't believe that his entire life all he was doing was getting closer. He fell into the trap of thinking that all he was doing his entire life was just dealing with garbage and getting farther and farther away. And he didn't realize that the truth is the way to come close to Hashem is by sifting through the garbage. It's by finding Hashem in all physical life. And the way of doing that, you don't necessarily feel it. When a person is involved in sifting through and finding Hashem in physical reality, and finding Hashem and trying to break through, trying to find Hashem in the garbage of reality, you don't necessarily feel like you're doing something. What you feel is the opposite. You feel like all you're doing is involved in stupidity. You feel that you're just involved in garbage. But the truth is you're getting closer. And he goes on to say, he says, Osha azai shukushu samachetz al pesach, or you're very close. You can be mamish very close and you turn back. Azai misgabel v'sitrach v'adavar ma'id ma'id. But you know what? Davka, the closer you get, says Rabbi Nachman. Davka, the closer you get to finding eventually the core of goodness that's inside reality, that's inside your life. Davka, the closer you get, the more the Eitzar piles on the garbage, the more the Eitzar fights you and makes you feel like you're dealing with the lowest of the low. Think about it. Reb Nosson gave the following mashal. He said, when a person's making a piece of bread like we've been talking about, so you're sifting through. You have to sift through the shells. You have to sift through even the flour. You have to sift through the flour to get rid of all the pieces of dirt and so on and so forth. And eventually you get the piece of bread. So you think you're done. Finally, I have a piece of bread. Says Rabbi Nachman, the truth is, now is exactly when the most difficult part of separating good and bad takes place. And now when a person digests it, without getting too graphic, right? We all understand that when a person digests a piece of food, now the real garbage comes out. Says Rabbi Nosson, just like every individual person, in his path in life is this process of making bread, of sifting through all the garbage of his life, so too the Jewish history is also the same process. And Davka, the latest generations, Davka, our generation, our job, we already passed the plowing and the sowing and the sifting and the baking. We did all that. Previous generations have done that. What's our job? Our job is now the last point, which is the digestion. And Rav Nosson says, Davka, the digestion, which is so important. That's mamish the goal. We're holding by the door. We're standing by the door. But Davka, then we feel as if we're mamish dealing with the garbage of the garbage, the worst of all things. And it's Davka then. And this is why the Nisyonos, the tests of our generation, are the most difficult. Why? It's not because we're the smallest. It's not because we're the farthest away. It's Davka because we're the closest. It's Davka because we're holding right there. We're holding by digesting the food. We're taking the mamish, the goodness of the goodness out of the bread. And by doing that, we have to separate the garbage of the garbage. That's the job of our generation. We already passed all the initial steps. The initial steps when a person has to separate the kernel from the chaff. Okay, there's garbage over there, but chaff is not as bad as when a person has to relieve himself, right? But that last step of separating the goodness of the good, the greatest of the good, then that means that you have to separate it from the baddest of the bad, from the worst of the worst. And a person feels that you're far away, but that's Davka, the most crucial point. This is Davka, why our generation, if you think about it. Think about this for a second. And there's something very unique that just recently happened. Very recently. There's an obsession with food nowadays. I don't mean that people like eating. People have always liked eating. But I'm talking about the idea of taking food and making it into an art. Think about this for a second. If you took one of our grandfathers, take a person from 100 years ago, yeah? And you sit him down and you give him a piece of chicken. And you're eating the same piece of chicken. And you say, you know what? The sweetness of the apricot is overpowering the earthiness of the guy's going to look like you're a Mishugana. Like, Mishugana, just eat the piece of chicken and shut up. Like, what? It's really true. It's really true. But nowadays, Davka, there's such a thing. There's such a thing as people taking food very seriously. It's an art. It's a craft. It's not a simple thing. So the average person might think, okay, it's because people nowadays are shallow. It's not true. A Jew who has eyes in his head knows that every single issue that our generation goes through, it's deep in Yanim, big in Yanim. The fact that nowadays there's such an avoida, it's mamish an avoida. Food is an avoida. It's an art. It's an obsession. It's a craft. It's something people take so seriously. It's because that's the way of Hashem telling us that our job is the last step in the process of Berurim. We're holding by the end. We're holding by the time of eating the food, finally. We've gone through the generations of sifting and the flour and going through this and picking up this and picking up that. And it's finally time to actually really do the real job of eating the food and consuming it and separating the mamish, the real good from the real bad. So that's why we find ourselves in a generation that's obsessed with food. We find ourselves in a generation that's obsessed with all sorts of craziness. All craziness. The worst Yetzaharas. The worst Yetzaharas we have. Why? It's not because we're far away. It's the exact opposite. It's because we're holding by taking it, because our job, we have such potential to take out the greatest of the great. So the part of that is to separate it from the worst of the worst. That's part of the deal. That's our job, that's our mission. So how do we do this? How do we do this? Where do we find in ourselves the strength of being able to handle this? Hashem gave us a tremendously difficult test. It's a tremendously difficult test. It's much easier. Back in the day it was much easier. Nowadays it's a lot harder. The potential is a lot more nowadays though. So where do we find this strength? So let's go back. Just like that first commandment that Hashem gave to the human being, to humankind, the first thing Hashem said, Mikol eitz hagan, ochel toichel, eat from all the trees, me'etz hadas toiver lo yislechem, but don't eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. The tree of knowledge of good and evil, he ate from. And we're suffering from that to this day. Every single thing that a Jew eats, Sfarim tell us, it's the same taste as the eitz hadas. It's the same thing again. When we eat food, we're not connecting to Hashem through it. It's very, very difficult. But there was another tree. There was another tree in that gan, in that orchard, that Adam Rishon stayed away from. What was the other tree? The Eitz HaChaim, the tree of life. So the pasuk says that after Adam Rishon ate from the tree of knowledge and he was banished from the gan, he was banished from Gan Eden. So the pasuk says that Hashem stopped him. Hashem blocked the way with malachim. Hashem stopped him from being able to go back and eating from the Eitz HaChaim. But the truth is, Hashem later on in history, took that Eitz HaChaim. He took the tree of life. Not the tree of knowledge, he took the tree of life and actually gave it to the Jewish people. When did that happen? That's Har Sinai. The pasuk says, Eitz Chaim hi l'machazikim ba. Because the pasuk says that the Torah is a tree of life to all that holds on to it. What does that mean? It means that every single food that a person eats, all the food that we're in contact with all our lives, is this idea of eating. Eating means good and bad. Eating means garbage. And in their garbage, finding something good. But there's one type of eating. Which is all good. All good. And that's the Eitz HaChaim. That's the tree of life. That's the Torah itself. There's one Eitzah. There's one Eitzah for a person to be able to survive digesting the Eitz HaDas, the tree of knowledge, to be able to digest this life, this world, this generation. How? It's at the same time that you're digesting all things of this world, at the same time make sure to digest the Eitz HaChaim. What does that mean? What does it mean to digest Torah? What does it mean to really absorb Torah properly? So listen to what Rabbi Nosson writes. He says like this. Every single person has to know this. That even if you find yourself in a very low place, you're not holding by anything, you're very, very low. You're very, very low. Very simple, plain and pashut. If you escape every single day to Torah, hein harbe, hein mat, whether it's a lot of learning, whether it's a little bit of learning, whether it's a high level of learning, whether it's a low level of learning, it doesn't make a difference. Let's say you can't spend a lot of time learning because you're involved in parnasa, which is a great mitzvah, or other things that hold you back from learning. I'll call upon him, nevertheless. If you make the Torah your place of refuge, if you make your Torah the escape of where you run to learn every day, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, an hour, whatever the case may be, every single day you digest the Eitz HaChaim along with all the other digestings of the Eitz HaDas that you're doing constantly. Every single one of us, just walking in the street, we're taking in the Eitz HaDas. We're eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. That's all that we're doing all day long. The antidote is the Eitz HaChaim. And that means every single Jew, plain and pashut, uncomplicated, simple. We all know this, but this is the truth. Every single Jew, no matter whatever level he's on, no matter how many difficulties he's dealing with, has to spend some time learning. I don't care if it's a pasuk in Chumash, or if you're holding a zayar, it doesn't make a difference. A person has to run to learning. A person has to escape to learn something. Why? He goes on. As bevadei soif kol soif, because in the end, the more a person digests the tree of life, the more of an antidote he's taking in to deal with the Eitz Hadas, the tree of knowledge. Eventually you will become purified from all the impurities that you find yourself involved in, and you will, in truth, come close to Hashem. Because even though the garbage that a person has to sift through, because of his involvement in the tree of knowledge of good and evil, because of all the garbage that he has to, because his job is to find that goodness within all the garbage, and he has to do that. But the strength that he finds himself having to be able to withstand all those difficulties, all the difficulties that happen when a person begins the process of searching, they come in more and more difficulties. He goes on to say, and therefore a person has to strengthen himself in his connection to plain and pashat, to daven and to learn. Uncomplicated. It's as simple as that. A person has to be mechazik himself that, you know what? This world is a world of difficulties. This world is a world of eating. Eating means being involved in garbage. Eating means sifting through good and bad. Eating means going to college and going to work and dealing with people that you shouldn't deal with and people that you want to deal with but you know you shouldn't, and reading things that you shouldn't read and seeing things you shouldn't see, and all the stuff that every single one of us does. Well, every single one of us does. We're constantly bringing inside of ourselves the Eitz Hadas, the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And our job as Jews of this world, of this last generation, is to make the final clarifications, to separate the goodness of all good from the worst of the worst. That's our job. But the strength, where do we get our strength from? How do we have the strength to be able to do this? The strength, the antidote, the adrenaline rush, the things that we need to take into ourselves to be able to deal with that is the Eitz HaChaim, it's the tree of life. And the tree of life means Torah. It means committing to a life of Yiddishkeit. It means committing to Torah mitzvahs, to keep every detail of halacha according to the best that we're capable of doing. It means learning every single day a basic amount, whatever the person's level is, committing, escaping, making the Eitz HaChaim, the tree of life, also part of your diet. If a person goes his entire life only eating from the Eitz Hadas, it's a terrible tragedy. If we have to make our diet also consist of the Eitz HaChaim. The more we do that, the more strength we'll have. The Malachim visited Avram Avinu, right? The Malachim visited Avram Avinu. This is the first time a Malachus from heaven. This is the first time that they came down to earth and they ate food. They saw what it means to be involved in this world. It was so difficult for them. To clarify, to take the food that they took in from Avram Avinu, holy kosher food. It was so difficult for them to handle that they got stuck. They were unable to go back to the original place. It took 100 years for them to be able to get back. It took that long. So eventually, hundreds of years later, Moshe Rabbeinu goes up to heaven, right? Moshe Rabbeinu goes up to heaven, and Hashem is about to give him the Torah. He's going to take the Torah away from the angels and give it to Moshe Rabbeinu. So what does the Malachim say? We're going to attack this guy. Let's kill this guy. He's trying to steal from us. So what does Hashem do? We quote from the Medrash, right? What did Hashem do? Hashem changed the face of Moshe Rabbeinu to look like Avram Avinu. What did Hashem say? You remember back years ago, you went down to earth, and you tasted what it means. You were there for 10 minutes. For 10 minutes, you were there and you felt what it means to be a human being for 10 minutes. And you couldn't, and for 100 years you were stuck. 100 years you were stuck. You remember what that was like? Being stuck down in physical life without any escape, without any thing to hold on to, without any lifeline? For 10 minutes you were down there and you tasted of this world and you were stuck for 100 years. So Hashem says to these malachim, so now my children are down there, and they were in Mitzrayim of all places, the lowest of the low. For 210 years they're servants, and you're going to hold back the Torah from them? They dafka need the Torah because they're living a life of this world. They need the Torah to be that Eitz Chaim, to be that antidote, to be that lifeline, to give them the strength to do their mission of fixing the Eitz Hadas. Listen to what he writes. He says that was exactly the tachlis of why this happened. He goes on to say as follows. When the Malachim came to Avram Avinu, that was already the beginning of the process of the Torah being given. He goes on to say, and that's exactly when Avram Avinu started the process of saving us. He says, he gave them Malachim to eat. Why? In order they should understand what it means to be in this world, what it means to be stuck down here, what it means to have to go to work. The Malachim don't have any idea what that means. They have no idea what it means to have to go shopping. They have no idea. They have no idea what it means to take a Jewish neshama and to get it stuck in Seasons. Seasons is a nice place. There's nothing wrong with Seasons, but you know what I mean. There's Costco, fine. Let's go Costco, right? You take a Jewish neshama and you get it's a rachmanis. It's mamash. It's a tragedy. It's mamash a tragedy. You take a Jew, you take a neshama which is infinite, the light of the living God itself, right? And you take it and you make it sit. Some class with some professor doesn't know anything. He's talking out of whatever, and he's talking about whatever he believes in, whatever. It's a churban. It's mamish a disaster. So Avram Avinu wanted the malachim to taste a little bit. So he gives them what to eat. He gives them physical food, and they're reeling from it for 100 years. 100 years. So he goes on to say. That's exactly what Al King Kisharotz Lakacha Galmaisha. Therefore, hundreds of years later, when they try to complain about Moshe Rabbeinu, Kisha'ol Lamar, when he goes up to heaven, Lakavasa to take the Torah. So what happens? So Hashem says to these malachim, don't you remember him? This is the person that you ate from. Meaning, Haynu, Hashem means Hashem was telling them, how do you even open your mouth to tell me that I shouldn't give the Torah to human beings? Didn't you eat from this world? And you tasted a little bit of what my children have to go through every single day. You tasted a little bit what that means. What that means to be a human being. And you know it's impossible to live without the Torah. So the whole reason why we're here, the whole reason why we have the Torah is because Avram Avinu fed the malachim. And he showed the malachim for 10 minutes what we have to deal with. We have to be mechazik ourselves. We have to mamash be mechazik ourselves. This is the last generation this is the last birurim are taking place through our hands. The last clarifications, and that means dealing with the garbage of the garbage. But the more we eat, the more we're involved in food, the more we're involved in separating between the good and bad and in the process of our eating, so to speak, the metaphorical eating, the more we have to digest the Eitz HaChaim more and more and more, the more learning we have to do, the more davening we have to do, the more committing we have to do to Yiddishkeit. And when Mashiach eventually comes, and the food will be fully digested, and the garbage will be kicked out, and the person, the Klal Yisrael, the human being of all human beings will become energized through the food of all of our experiences. When this eventually happens, Chazal said the following thing: that there's going to be a meal at the end of days. There's going to be a meal, a suda, la'asid lavo. And Chazal say after the meal's over, all the tzaddikim are going to eat from this food. And Chazal say that after the meal's over, it's time to bench. And Hashem's going to offer the kosher bracha. He's going to offer benching to Avram Avinu. And Avram Avinu is going to say, I can't bench because Yishmael came out of me. And he's going to say, Yitzchak, you bench. I can't bench. Esav came out of me. He's going to say, Yaakov, you bench. Yaakov says, I can't bench. I married two wives. And once the Torah was given, it doesn't look so good. So Chazal say that David HaMelech is going to get up and say, you know what? I'll bench. Li no levarich. To me, it's befitting that I bench. Kais Yeshua Sasa. So the question is obvious. David HaMelech wasn't without Averis. On his level, whatever it means that he did, whatever it is, he's not clean 100%. So why is David HaMelech the one to bench? Say the Sfarim. David HaMelech doesn't just mean David HaMelech. David means the last generation before Mashiach comes. The ones that complete the process of clarification. That meal at the end of time means the meal of all time. It means that last meal that brings together all the process of clarifications that started with harvesting, that started with plowing and sowing and reaping and sifting and baking, all that stuff. Eventually, even ending with the digestion of this last generation, of clarifying the energy from the food with the garbage of the garbage. Avram Avinu says, "I can't bench because I started it." Yitzchak says, I can't bench, I continued it. Yaakov, I continued it. Who should really bench? The ones that finish it. Our generation. That's David HaMelech. We have to be mechazik ourselves with this. That never to give up, never to think that I'm far away because I don't feel it. Never to think that I'm far away from Hashem because I don't feel like getting out of bed in the morning. Of course you don't feel like getting out of bed in the morning because you're involved in the most difficult part of the historical process of Mashiach coming. You're involved in sifting mamish the excrement from the nutrition. And when you're involved in such a thing, you don't feel like you're doing much. You feel like you're involved in real garbage. Of course you don't feel like getting out of bed. You have to mechazik yourself that despite the fact that you don't feel like getting out of bed, despite the fact that you don't feel like opening up a chumash to learn, despite the fact that you don't feel like davening, you're closer than ever. You're closer than ever. We're mamish holding by the door, and it would be a real shame if we were to turn away now. A real shame. Let me end off with a ma'aseh. I don't know what am I going to say? I don't know what story to say. I'll just tell you like this. There's a story, historically by going back, way back, a major approach that many people used to take in order to become a tzaddik was the approach of fasting. Of hurting the bodies, there was such a thing as mikvah of shalag, where people would mamish roll around naked in snow just to pain themselves. It would be such an avodah. By the Baal Shem Tov, once the Baal Shem Tov came, this was looked at. Not only was this not considered something helpful, this was considered mamish terrible. It makes a person far away. So the Toldos Yaakov Yossi used to say the following thing. He was a great disciple of Baal Shem Tov. He used to say that people that fast in order to fix their aveiros, you compare it to the following thing. He said, let's say there's a government. The government needs money, right? So they have to levy taxes. So the problem is that who's basically in charge of the government? The rich people. So the rich people are really the ones with the money, but because they don't want to give the money, so they make the taxes on all the poor people. So the poor people are innocent of all the problems to begin with. They're the ones that suffer, well, all the problems that are coming because of the rich people. Yeah, nice and cholia. Yeah? So maybe not. I'm not. Whatever. I'm an amaretz. Yeah, the 99%. Whatever. That's the ma'isa. So what the Toldos Yaakov Yossi say? He said the same thing. He said the same thing goes on. What sins? What sins in a person? His eyes, his hands, his feet, right? His mouth, his ears, his stomach. What your stomach ever do to you? So when now you did all these averos and you want to fix yourself, so what do? You punish your stomach? That's what you do? So Toldos Yaakov Yossi, if you want to fix yourself, say words of Torah. Fix your mouth by saying words of Torah. Fix your ears by listening to shiurim. Fix your eyes by looking in svarim. Don't fix your eyes and your ears and your mouth and your hands by punishing your stomach. Don't do that. That's not solving the problem. There's a story of Great Rukveger was a Rosh Yeshiva. To say anything about him, he was the Gadol Hadar. So they said that there was once a bacher in his yeshiva that they came to him and said that there's mamash a tragedy taking place. What's the tragedy? He said, this bacher, he's a great kid, he's mamash a masmi, he learns all day long, he goes to bed, and before he goes to bed he has supper. What's his supper? A dry piece of bread, and then he says Shema and goes to sleep. Mamash a tragedy. So Rabbi Kiva said, listen, we have to solve this problem, we have to make sure that he has what to eat, but that's not a tragedy. You know what a tragedy is? A tragedy is a person who has a lot to eat and goes to bed without saying Shema. That's a tragedy. So that's a tragedy. Tragedy is not what, it's difficult, we have to fix it, but that's not a tragedy. We have to be mechazik ourselves, that not to hold back from eating, not to hold back from being involved in this world, the opposite. Do whatever we have to do whatever it is that we find ourselves stuck in, and to be mechazik ourselves that our avodah is the avodah birum of clarifying, of separating the good and evil, and part of that process is to get your hands dirty, and you don't feel like you're doing anything. You don't feel like you're doing anything. But you have to be mechazik yourself that you are. Not only are you doing something, you're doing mamish, the last job, that you're doing the most important thing. And we have to remember that the strength that we have, that gives us, the source of our strength to be able to do this, is a healthy diet of Eitz HaChaim, the tree of life. We mechazik ourselves with learning and davening, plain and pasha. So we should be zocha very, very soon, to finish this job, to finish completing the digestion of the Eitz Hadas Tov, completing our absorption of Eitz HaChaim, and eventually we'll come to the great suit that we talked about with Mashiach Tzidkeinu Meir V'meinu. Amen. Amen.